Okay, thank you.
Christine Loney, owner, and Michael P. Terra, I guess, T-Ticket LLC, 38 Nicholson Crescent.
Okay, thank you.
And again, that's for a variance and special use.
So we've got a full agenda tonight, so it's going to be very unlikely that in the next 2 hours and 55 minutes that we'll clear the calendar. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to hear them in the order, starting with the June 29th continuances.
Did have a summary.
We're going to do that. I'm just letting people know how we're going to do this so that they understand. So I'm going to start with the June 29th continuances. So the first one up is going to be Mr. Amarant, and then we're going to go from there in order of the June 29th continuances, and then we'll pop over to the 8/24 ones. So no guarantee how long it's going to be before we get through, but the next order of business is a summary case. A summary case is a case which has less than 25% of a request for a variance, and it's typically, if nobody's here to object it, against it, we will hear it as a summary, which means there'll be no testimony, we'll just vote it either for or against it. So, Mr. Heaney, if you could read that case for us.
Petition of Reggie Nally, owner, and Fred Lothram Jr., applicant, for a variance from section 603 and 701 to construct a 12-foot by 14-foot rear deck with a 10-foot setback where 20 feet is required. Said real estate is located at 4B Marshall Lane and further identified as Lot 80 on Tax Assessor's Plat 105.
Is there anyone here that would like to speak either for or against the petition? Hearing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and we're going to have a vote. Can I have a motion to accept the variance as presented?
I'll make the motion to grant the petition.
Motion made by Tom Savera. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Eric Curtin. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0.
Petition of Telly Amarant and Elizabeth Amarant, owners, by their attorney Christopher J. Bean Esquire, for a special use permit from sections 902, 602 to allow a two-family residential use pursuant to section 602. Said real estate is located at 163 Aquinic Avenue and further identified as Lot 14 on Tax Assessor's Plat 115 Southeast. There's also a variance. Petition of Telly Amarant and Elizabeth Amarant, owners, by their attorney Christopher J. Bean Esquire, for a variance from sections 903 and 603 to tear down the existing commercial structure and construct a two-story family residence, resulting in a 26.9 lot coverage where 25% is allowed. A front yard setback of 16 feet where 25 feet is required on a lot with an area of 7,996 square feet when a minimum of 15,000 square feet is required, and a frontage of 74.99 feet where a minimum of 120 feet is required. Said real estate is located at 163 Aquinic Avenue and further identified as Lot 14 on Tax Assessor's Plat 115 Southeast.
Mr. Bean?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I apologize, my clients, the Amarants, have not arrived yet. I don't think they expected to be first up, and I think they're coming at 6:30.
Okay, so we're gonna table you then, so we're not gonna open the hearing.
Thank you, Your Honor.
The Auchincloss will be next.
Petition of Thomas and Ella Auchincloss, owners, by their attorney David P. Martlin Esquire, for a special use from sections 803A and 1106 to construct a 12-foot by 19-foot, one-story home office study addition to the main house, which is located in Zone 1 of the Water Protection District District pursuant to plans filed with said petition. Said real estate is located at 233 Third Beach Road and further identified as Lot 149 on Tax Assessor's Plat 125.
Good evening, Mr. Martland.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, David Martland on behalf of Thomas and Ellen Auchincloss. The matter before the board this evening deals with the property located at 233 Third Beach Road that my clients own and reside in. On the property, there are two structures. One, the main principal residence, which, if you refer to the site plan that's projected, is sort of in the middle of the property. And then there is a garage located in the front yard along the northerly boundary. In that garage, there is an apartment on the second floor. So this property is classified as a two-family, and therefore anything you do with it, it's non-conforming in the district, so it requires a special use permit. Additionally, it's located in Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District, as the stream runs along the front edge of the property on Third Beach Road. What the Auchinclosses are looking to do is to create essentially a study home office by constructing sort of a small addition to the front of the structure. Originally, the Auchinclosses had looked at expanding the garage and putting the home office in the garage building, but because of the proximity of that garage to the stream, there were flood zone impacts that made that too difficult to do from a permitting perspective. So they're looking to expand the footprint of the existing structure to accommodate that. So we're here this evening for the one-story addition to the front. I do have Lynn Small with me from Northeast Engineers, who created the soil erosion sedimentation control plan, the proposed conditions plan, and the measures, which details measures to be undertaken during the construction. There would be a silt fence put up where the stockpile of the soil would be, so that you don't have that sedimentation from the construction activity going down into the stream. But there's no change of use here. There's no negative impact to the Paradise Brook across the front of this. It's still going to make, that building is still going to be utilized for single-family residential purposes. We've been referred to both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission. We've received positive recommendations from both the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission, with the provisions that conditions should be placed on any approval, which would require the builder to comply with the provisions of the town stormwater management ordinance, chapter 153, and the construction site runoff and erosion control, chapter 151. With the use of pervious paving and other methods to promote infiltration of stormwater runoff should be considered in those practices. And finally, that the use of lawn chemicals, fertilizers, and other chemicals with the potential to adversely impact groundwater be prohibited from being utilized. Those conditions are typical in any of these applications located in Zone 1. They're acceptable, obviously, to the applicant. I've got there's an existing septic system this is serviced by septic here. It is located to the south and westerly portion of the property. There's no change to the septic that's being proposed. And so there's no further, potential harmful, septic located within the area. It's actually located outside of the Zone 1 district, the septic. I've got Lynn Small to answer any questions the board might have.
I have a question.
Yes.
I believe the Conservation Commission recommended that gutters be added to the addition so that they are directed toward the vegetation for surface infiltration. Has that been taken care of in the plans?
Yeah, so those would be added in the permitting for the soil erosion sedimentation control plan. Those are a measure taken during construction that Mr. Hall has recommended be taken.
So your client would be fine if the motion stipulates that you comply with all conditions?
All conditions of Conservation Commission and Planning Board.
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yeah, they should be, both should be added.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Would you like to bring Ms. Small up, or?
Yes, I'll ask Lynn if she can come up, please.
Lynn, raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Lynn Small from Northeast Engineers, 6 Valley Road, Middletown.
Thank you.
Lynn, you're familiar with the subject property, is that correct?
Yes,
You conducted a site visit of this property,
yes,
and you designed the plans that are, the site plans that are before the board this evening, is that right?
correct.
Would you like those site plans to be?
Sure.
If you get it, leave with SDCS. Then you basically explain the topography of the site.
The general topography of the site slopes towards the brook, Paradise Brook, which runs about parallel with where
The proposal is to construct a 12 by 9 division of property.
yeah, it's 228 square feet.
And what type of measures are you proposing to utilize to ensure that there's no negative impact to others?
So we have proposed soil erosion sediment control measures to protect downgraded areas so that all sediments associated with the project stay upland of the brook and within the vicinity of the construction site.
Do you believe that, in your opinion, I'm sorry, I don't think I asked, the small be recognized.
Yeah, we recognize Ms. Small. She's appeared before us on numerous occasions, so we recognize her as an expert witness.
In your opinion, as a professional engineer, do you believe that what's being proposed would have any adverse impacts to the watershed?
I do not. According to the state guidelines for stormwater projects that are less than 600 square feet are so minor that they're actually exempt from stormwater analysis.
And your plans would comply with all the requirements of the town stormwater ordinances?
Yes, it does.
And you're amenable to all the conditions proposed by the Planning and Conservation Commission relative to the animals stormwater?
Project's exempt from stormwater, but we're amenable to the originator's
still must comply with that. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear.
Okay.
The conditions relative to meeting the town stormwater guidelines.
Yes.
Are there any conditions that you're aware of that would negatively impact work as a result of the proposed project?
I mean, the addition is proposed within a portion of the 100-year floodplain. So generally what you do there is you provide a compensatory area for that small section of land that you'd be filling, so that if the brook should ever flood, it has a dip in another area.
That has a what?
A dip, a depression within another area within the same watershed. So it'll have no impact on the floodplain.
And you provided for that in plans?
That'll be provided on the soil erosion sediment control plan for the building permit.
I don't have any further questions for Ms. Small.
Does anyone on the board have any questions of Ms. Small? Okay, thank you, Mr. Martland. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you.
Dave, I have one question for you.
Yes.
Maybe, did we see this, we saw this a couple of years,
It was
within the
for the-
last year and a half?
Yeah,
or
it was for
something
the
else?
kitchen that they put on the other side of the building.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and if you'll recall, you're absolutely correct. There was a kitchen put on the opposite corner of the
Yeah.
house, or an expanded kitchen. And at that time, I believe I had mentioned they were looking at doing an expansion to the garage. And that we would be back later. Well, it turns out that we couldn't, they couldn't do that expansion because of the floodplain
Okay.
issues there. And so that's why we're here with this proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martland.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak either for or against the petition? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Can I have a motion to accept the petition as presented pursuant to the two requirements from the Planning Board and the Conservation Commission?
I'll make a motion to accept the application as presented pursuant to both the recommendations by the Conservation and the Planning Board.
I'll second that.
Second by Judith Rosenthal. Discussion?
Well, I'm gonna vote in favor of it. I believe it's a very minor addition, and the relief is reasonably necessary for a use on the property. It's a minor, very minor addition.
Any other discussion? I think there's 5 criteria that a special use has to meet. One is it won't result in a significant diminution of property values. I don't think that will happen in the surrounding area. It will not create a nuisance in the neighborhood. This is not an expansion of use. It's just making more living spaces for the existing use. It's compatible with our comprehensive plan, and that in granting this special use, it will not be detrimental or substantially permanently injure the appropriate use of property in the surrounding area, and that in granting this, it won't create a hazardous condition. So I'm going to support it as well. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Martland.
Thank you.
Let's look at our calendar, see where we can go. Let's go to, we can go, let's go to the top of, we're done, that's done at 29, right? TRC, continued, yes, so we can go back up to the top of the list. A1 roofing.
Petition of A1 Roofing and Construction LLC owners by their attorney, David P. Marlin Esquire, for a special use from sections 1106 to construct a 5,200 square foot office and a special trade contracting building. Associated parking and water quality improvements as approved by RIDEM, located in Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District. Said real estate is located at 990 Aquidneck Avenue and further identified as Lot 507 on Tax Assessor's Plat 114. There is also a special use. Excuse me, there is not, sorry.
That's what.
Yep.
Good evening, Mr. Martland.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, David Martland on behalf of A1 Roofing and Construction, the applicant and owner of the property. Property is located on Aquidneck Avenue, 990 Aquidneck Avenue. It's designated as Plat 114, Lot 507. Presently, the property is utilized by A1 Roofing and Construction, where they have storage of different containers and materials and things of that nature connected to the special trade contracting business. What Mr. Napolitano wants to do is to construct two buildings on the site. One building would have a combination of office and special trade contractor use. That would be in the front. It would have a footprint area of 10,800 square feet. And the building in the rear would have a footprint of 5,200 square feet, which would be for special trade contracting use. These uses are permitted by right in the district, being the limited business district. However, the property is located in Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District. There is a stream that it creates the northerly, basically the northerly boundary of this property. It runs between this property and the Cardi's Corporation property to the north. There's a pond on the Cardi's property, and then the stream works its way past this property, down through Valley View, and ultimately down through Valley View, and ultimately to the Bailey Brook. So any use, any proposed construction is required to seek a special use permit through this process. Also, any development of this nature requires a development plan review. So that's how this process started back in, I believe it was April. We filed the applications for a special use permit and development plan review. We were referred to the planning board and the technical review committee for advisory recommendations relative to those applications. The planning board issued its recommendation on April 16, 2021. I've got copies of that, if the board would like those, or...
For the planning board, we have copies of the
You've
planning
got
board.
those? And I would,
We have the notice of planning board recommendation, so we have that.
could I ask that that be marked as petitioner's exhibit 1?
Yep, we're going to call Exhibit 1, the notice of planning board recommendation dated April 16, 2021.
Thank you. Now, that notice of recommendation came with certain conditions of approval, which we can go over when we have the testimony of my witnesses. This also was referred to the Conservation Commission. The Conservation Commission issued an email to the building department. Was that part of your packet as well, Mr. Chairman?
I'm looking right now, so. I do not see the Conservation Commission in here.
I've got copies of that email.
Yeah, if you can
may
give
approve.
us a copy, that'd be great. We're gonna mark this Exhibit 2.
Thank you. So Exhibit 2 is an email from the Conservation Commission meeting of June 14, 2021. And a portion of this reads, "The request of A1 Roofing and Construction LLC for a special use permit for 990 Aquidneck Avenue was approved unanimously. A long discussion about storage of hazardous products, placement of dumpsters, and management of water runoff was concluded with reassurances." Also, at the outset of applying for the various permits and approvals, the applicant was required to go to the Department of Environmental Management to request a permit, an insignificant alteration permit, because of the presence of wetlands on the site. That was actually secured back in 2019. And I've got copies of that I'd like to enter into the record.
Okay, we'll call that Exhibit 3.
So that was Exhibit 3. So the application before you this evening is, relates to the special use permit because the project's located in Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District. With me this evening, I've got Mike Russell, who is the site engineer. He did all the permitting associated with securing the DEM permit, as well as the plans for this property. Dan Herc, who's the architect, Herc Works Architecture, can walk through and describe the buildings, which were also reviewed from a development plan review standpoint by the planning board to make sure that they were consistent and appropriate with the commercial design standards. Jim Poole, who will be testifying from a real estate perspective, is here as well. And Sean Napolitano, who's the principal of A1 Roofing, is here to answer any questions the board may have relative to the proposal. With that, I would like to call Mr. Russell.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Mike Russell, LDEC Engineering Consulting, 680 Aquidneck Avenue.
Could you speak into the mic?
Lift the mic up a little bit, yeah, please.
Mike Russell, LDEC Engineering Consulting, 680 Aquidneck Avenue here in Middletown.
Mic seems really low tonight, Chris. Mr. Russell, you've appeared before us on numerous occasions in the capacity as an engineer, so we're going to recognize you this evening as an expert witness.
Thank you.
Is there an additional microphone available? Mike, I don't know if you want to utilize that way you can change the wall to the wood. Mike, you're familiar with the subject property, is that correct?
That's correct.
The, you've taken site visits of this property?
That's correct. Our firm did
Let me
it.
turn that off.
Can everybody hear me? That's correct. Our firm did the existing conditions survey of the property as well.
And could you essentially describe the existing conditions of the site?
Certainly. So I think Dave in his introduction described the current use of the site, current operation. But essentially the property is a little under 3 acres in area. It's approximately 75% impervious, a combination of pavement, compacted gravel, which we recognize as impervious. And the balance of the site is vegetation and wetlands, roughly 25%. There is no infrastructure, subsurface infrastructure currently on the property that we're aware of. There are utility stubs that are brought into the property for future use and development. But in terms of stormwater management, namely, the site discharges its surface runoff to the northwest corner of the property, which is the wetland area that Dave previously described.
Which is the what?
Wetland area that Mr. Martland previously described.
Thank you.
The access to the site is shown there in the northeast corner, which is approximately a 25-foot wide driveway in which the property line more or less splits that driveway. About 18 feet goes into this property, the subject property, and then the remaining area goes over to Carty's, their operation. So there is, as I said, there's limited infrastructure. It's kind of a mobile operation. Things are moving around as the owner sees fit, but that basically describes the existing conditions.
Now, the stream that runs through here, would be at the bottom of the deck, is shown on the plan?
That's correct. There's a fairly steep grade, about 15-foot drop or so down to the bottom of this area. So the shaded area that you see in the drawing up on the screen is essentially the width of the wetland area. The stream that Dave is referring to is a tributary to Bailey's Brook, and it's flowing certain times of the year, certainly flowing now, but that is essentially located in the middle of that shaded area.
And what type of water quality measures and stormwater mitigation measures does the site currently have?
None.
Now, could you go through and explain what is being proposed and what improvements are being proposed to both the building and the parking lot?
Certainly. So one of the first things that the applicant wanted to do or had to do was apply to Rhode Island DOT for fiscal alteration permit. One of the requests in that application was to widen the existing curb cut, which we previously described, to allow a 30-foot opening on his property. Cardies would continue to have their access. There's actually a second curb cut to the north of this on Aquidneck Avenue. Once within the property, two buildings, as Dave described, are planned to be constructed. One a little over 10,000 square feet, one a little over 5. The larger building has a mixed use of office and contractor space. The smaller building is primarily contractor space. The parking associated with this particular use, there's 32 spaces required. We're providing 36 with a loading space for each building. The site circulation is adequate per the planning board's requirements to access each of the buildings. The applicant is also proposing to connect to the abutting lot at 990 through essentially the middle of the property. That access is planned to be gated, and there is a fence that is going to be placed along the property line. With that, there will be associated landscaping, site lighting. Currently, as I mentioned, the property is about 25% green space, vegetated. That number will go up to a little over 50% for this proposal. The landscaping and stormwater management will be integrated. That was a request of DEM as part of that process. So there are low impact development practices that will provide water quality treatment, mainly to protect the wetland, as well as rate and volume mitigated measures. So the existing discharge point, as I mentioned, everything wants to go to the northwest corner of the property. We've maintained that pattern with these practices and discharge, and that was submitted to DEM as part of the preliminary determination application that was approved and issued an insignificant alteration permit.
Mike, just bring your attention to page 4 of your plan set. I believe the board would have copies of the plan set. So this is page 4 of 5. This would be drainage and grading.
That's correct.
Could you explain these improvements in reference to this page 4, where the water is going and what types of measures are being taken to improve the water quality as well as mitigate the rate of runoff?
As well as to mitigate the water.
The rate of runoff.
Okay, thank you.
So to expand a little bit more on that, and I apologize, all the consultants have submitted drawings to be put up on the screen. For some reason, mine didn't, there was a problem with it. So I have copies of my plan set. If the board members do not have copies, I'd be happy to distribute those if need be.
I'll take one.
I'd like to see one too.
Share. We'll share. It's just well shared. Thank you.
Doesn't seem accurate. That was advertised.
So I think Mr. Martland wanted me to further describe the stormwater now that you have the plan in front of you. As I mentioned, the practices are proposed to be low-impact development practices, vegetated swales, filter strips, bioretention areas. As the buildings are more or less centered in the property, the stormwater basically forms the perimeter of the property. Everything will be collected at various discharge points away from the building and then routed to their pre-development discharge point, which is primarily on the north boundary or northwest corner of the north boundary. There's limited earthwork associated with each one of those, limited piping and structures, which is always a favorable condition to the applicant or DEF. But it provides the water quality volume necessary for this development, and additionally, it mitigates the required storm events.
And this system was reviewed and approved by DEM.
DEM, DOT, town engineer, technical review committee, and conservation commission.
And it was also reviewed by the town's consultant engineer, the enforcement engineer.
I believe so.
In your opinion, what's proposed in these plans, would that have an adverse impact or effect on the watershed protection?
No, what is significant improvement for what's there now.
So we're going from a condition where there's zero water quality measures to, basically it's a state-of-the-art system.
That's correct.
So you've got 2 retention areas, is that correct?
Yes, three.
Can you explain the location of those 3 areas?
Right, so as I mentioned, it's kind of a perimeter system along the southerly boundary and the northerly boundary. There are two detention slash water quality collection areas along the southern boundary and one on the northerly boundary, but everything is conveyed towards the northwest corner of the property.
A quick question. So you say that, it's going to be a significant improvement or it's going to be an improved situation is what you're presenting, I guess. What is there right now? Nothing, right?
For stormwater?
No, not for stormwater. What buildings are there right now? Other than the I guess, Sean, you have dumpsters there now. What other buildings?
Yeah, so there are no structures in terms of buildings presently on site. So what you have presently are containers and dumpsters associated with the business, materials and things of that nature.
Okay.
And vehicles coming and going.
And is the current whole entire site impermeable?
75% is what he said.
75% of it is now?
So how much of an improvement will it be? If it's 75% impermeable now, what will it be after the project's built?
So the basically difference between 56% and so roughly 45% impervious,
So it's a significant improvement.
roughly 30%.
Right.
A reduction in impervious cover.
Right, right. Added to that, the stormwater improvements.
That's correct, but don't exist now. So as I mentioned, the stormwater and the landscaping is integrated together, and that percentage increases quite a bit.
Mike, the pavement, pervious pavement,
Proposed? No, the conventional asphalt.
conventional asphalt? Okay.
And Mike, the way the state permitting works associated with projects of this nature, the state looks for these opportunities where there's a redevelopment of property to obtain water quality measures and stormwater mitigation measures, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's directly in the rules and regulations, is that right?
That's correct. There's guidelines for dealing with. There's guidelines for dealing with different types of construction projects or hybrid projects. But in any case, water quality measures are right at the top of their list, especially when you're in close proximity to wetlands.
And from your perspective, as a professional engineer, you believe that what you've designed here meets or exceeds the criteria associated with watershed protection district?
Yes. And that's been vetted by the planning board and the conservation commission
And technical review?
and technical review.
So there are certain conditions associated with the planning board recommendation. Condition number 8, builder is required to comply with provisions of the town's stormwater management
Say what
ordinance.
it is again.
I'm sorry,
Builder is required
I'll
to.
slow down.
Thanks.
The builder is required to comply with the provisions of the town's stormwater management ordinance, chapter 153, in construction site plan and erosion control, chapter 151. The plans comply with these ordinances, and this is an acceptable condition.
Yes. Standard practice for town of Middletown.
Condition 9, required maintenance of stormwater treatment facilities shall be performed on an ongoing basis in accordance with stormwater management. Prior to issuance of building permits, a stormwater maintenance easement in form acceptable to the town solicitor shall be recorded in the land evidence records. Said easement shall allow town access to the site for necessary maintenance of the storm drainage facilities, should the owner fail to do so, with the owner being responsible for the cost of such work. You're familiar with that condition?
Yes, I am.
It references certain maintenance obligations. Are you familiar with what those are?
Yes, I am. So as part of this overall permitting process for stormwater management, we prepared multiple documents with respect to operation and maintenance of stormwater management facilities. So the applicant has a sufficient guideline to go by, and certainly agreeable to that particular condition if need be.
Stormwater maintenance facilities, if they are not maintained, they become ineffective.
That's correct.
And so there's a stormwater management plan submitted which lays out all the requirements.
That's correct.
And this would require that this would be done on an annual basis and reported to the town.
If not more frequent than that.
And it also provides that the town will have an easement across the property to inspect if they so choose and to undertake the work if you think it's necessary and charge back the owner.
That's my understanding of the condition.
And this is an acceptable condition.
It is. I believe it is to the applicant as well.
Condition number 10, the use of non-chemicals, fertilizers, or other chemicals with potential adversely impact ground and surface water quality shall be prohibited within the watershed protection district zone.
That's an expected condition, given the location of this property in the watershed protection district. So certainly we'll comply with that.
There is a waiver from the commercial design standards that was granted by the planning board dealing with the landscape buffer. So the landscape buffer of at least 20 feet in width is required along the property line of the residential use, not provided at the rear property line due to the stormwater management feature. Could you please explain where that is located?
So probably the best sheet to refer to would be 4 of 10 in the set that you have there, and if you focus on the westerly boundary. So that waiver was requested because it's hard, you can't tell from the drawings, and I think an aerial image would better serve the point, but there's a large vegetated wetland area to the west of this property that serves as a natural buffer. So in order to make all of the site infrastructure work on this particular property, we elected to ask for that waiver, utilizing the luxury of having that vegetated area immediately to the west of the property.
And that was granted by the.
That's correct.
So you're not aware of any conditions that would, of the proposal that would be hazardous to the public health, safety, and welfare?
I'm not aware of any.
You're not aware of any conditions that would substantially or permanently injure properties in this area or this district?
No, I'm not aware of any.
And we're here seeking a special use permit, and we designed these plans. We're not requesting any variance, correct?
Not from this board.
And you've designed these plans to comply with all the appropriate zoning regulations.
Yes, they have.
I don't have any further questions, Mr. Russell.
Can we have that copy of your planning board document to put in the record?
Oh, it's been marked as Exhibit 1?
It's in
Okay,
there.
it's in there, yeah. Oh, yeah, I have it. That's okay.
If I could ask that Daniel Herkenrother be called?
Raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony tonight will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Daniel Herkenrother, that's Herchenroether. Address is 36 Aquidneck Avenue, Middletown.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan, you're the architect of record for this project, is that correct?
Yes.
Why don't you sort of briefly discuss your plans, your architectural plans with the board, what you've developed, that's been reviewed by the
Sure. If we could put on drawing A001 on the screen, it's the first sheet on this PDF packet. It's got a good overview of the site. There are two buildings on the site. The back building, which is planned north, and also the 3D image on the bottom left is the Tradesman Center. That's a 5,200 square foot, one-story building, and with the pitched roof, it's 29 feet in height, so a typical size structure. That's just open. It's got, I believe, 5 garage doors for different tradesman centers. Then we have the front building, which is comprised of 2 separate buildings. The brick building you see at the front, that is a 5,500 square foot building. The first floor is comprised of 2 offices. The second floor, which is the same size, is comprised of 3 offices. And then on the back of that building, on the first floor only, is 5,100 square feet of shop space. Oh, and that building is 28 feet high, which includes a decorative sloped roof.
What type of building materials are being utilized on the buildings?
The front building is primarily brick with a limestone base, aluminum-clad windows, and a shingled roof. And the rear building is going to be just metal siding, as it'll be a metal prefab building.
And the building in the front meets all the commercial design standards, except with respect to the use of synthetic materials, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what synthetic materials will be used?
We will have some painted boral trim siding, or boral, it's a fly ash product, or PVC. It'll be painted and it'll appear just like a wood trim.
And we received a waiver from the planning board for that, correct?
Yes.
And other than that, the building itself meets all of the design criteria.
Yes,
It has appropriate roof.
that's correct. A sloped roof of more than 412.
It
What?
has,
I'm sorry.
412 slope, more than a 412 slope.
Okay, thank you.
it provides the sufficient number, percentage of windows along the front facade, is that right?
Yes, the front and both sides.
And the roof screens any rooftop equipment.
Yes, correct. It's a 5-foot high screen for the roof.
The original submission for the building in the rear did not have such a roof, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And it was after meeting with the planning board. Planning board requested that that roof be changed, is that right?
Yes.
And how did you change it?
We added a roof around all the sides of the building, on both the front and the rear building. And I believe it's a 712, so it's a pretty steep slope roof.
So that was, previously it was a flat roof,
Yes, correct.
and the planning board, even though the building itself in the front on the street requested that they would like to see that brought up to greater compliance, see that building comply with the commercial design standards.
Yes.
And so you've done that, and the building in the rear now complies with commercial design standards as well as requiring the waivers other than the synthetic waivers.
Yes, correct.
The plan provides for the appropriate pedestrian access.
What is it? Right.
And that the plan provides for the appropriate pedestrian access to Quinnick Avenue.
Yes, correct. We have a sidewalk along the front of the office building.
And all of the lighting, exterior lighting will comply with the dark sky compliant.
Yes, correct.
And there are some new additions this year to the commercial design standards that added required trash receptacles and bike racks. Those have been added to the revised plan sets, right?
Yes, correct.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. Hartnell.
Okay, any questions for the architect?
Yes, I have one. To start with, I think when we read this, the petition in, we only talked about one building, so I'm gonna have to reread that at some point. And then secondly, I think I just heard you say, Mr. Herkenrecker, that there's 3 buildings? I thought there was 2 buildings.
It's 2 buildings. The front building is comprised of 2 separate buildings, but it's joined together.
It's adjoined.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So it's just two
So
structures.
it's 2 structures.
Correct, yes.
All right, because I thought I heard you say 3, and I wanted to hear an explanation as to why there was 3 instead of 2,
Well,
but I got it.
I'd like it, why do you differentiate the square footage? Why do you discuss them as 2 different buildings, the
Because
front
it's
building?
a different use. It's an office space on the front, which is the brick building, and the 1-story piece attached below there is a shop space for A1 roofing.
So if I could approach the screen.
Sure.
Just to make it clear. And this is on sheet A001. On the portion immediately adjacent to Aquidneck Avenue. This area that I'm showing is a 2-story portion. That portion is designed to be office space. This attached portion in the rear, which is the 5,100 square feet, I believe Dan indicated, 5,183, is a 1-story shop portion. So that's why Dan made those differentiations. Additionally, there is the second building in the rear here that is also to be used for special trade contractor use. That way it can be built in 2 phases. Typically, we're thinking the front building will be done first, and as needs change, the second one thereafter. So it's in the 2 structures there.
Over the 2 structures, if you will, how many tenants do you expect to have?
They expect to have in the office space. Again, Dan, how many offices?
5.
5 offices?
And so what is intended is that some of that office space would be utilized by A1, and then the special trade contractor space would be utilized by A1 to service their needs. Could it be rented out to other people? It could, but that is not the intent.
So the back 5 tradesmen's units could be rented out to 5 different construction companies?
It's not broken into that kind of space.
Yeah, sheet A202 is the drawing for the back tradesman center, and it's broken into 3 separate units right now. You can see the top right plan has unit 1, unit 2, and unit 3.
I think if I could just have Sean Napolitano answer your question, Eric.
Okay, Sean, raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony this evening will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Sean Napolitano, and my address is 29.5 Bliss Road in Newport.
Okay, thank you.
Sean, can you just sort of explain what your intent is for this development?
For the development, it would be for A1 roofing and constructions purposes, and then I would rent out some of the office space in the front building, and the back building could potentially be rented space also, although it would probably be very passive, probably storage for luxury vehicles or something like that, so it wouldn't be high impact. Because I don't want to have, it's not going to be a tradesman center. I'm not going to have multiple contractors working out of this area and develop space.
So your intent would be to build the front building and see what your needs are relative to that, whether you would need any additional space for spending the money to build the second building?
That's correct. Well, I would probably build a second building at the same time, just because the reduction in cost of construction to do things all at once.
Could you talk about the sequencing of the water mitigation and wetlands mitigation activities? Are they going to be sequenced as you build the different buildings, or did they all get done up front?
Why don't I have Mr. Russell answer that particular question?
So to answer your question, the idea would be to have all of that in place before the overall construction is complete. So if you want to break it out down between buildings, certainly, I don't know if there was a specific commission and technical review committee, Concom, or planning board, but I think it's obviously a wise idea to put all of your stormwater infrastructure, which is associated with the landscaping, in once you receive the building permit for the first building, whichever building is going to get built first.
Which what?
Whichever building is going to be constructed first, whatever building permit application is in place, if it's not for the rear building initially, all of the infrastructure should go.
And Mike, in addition to the infrastructure that would go in, there are other measures beyond that infrastructure that, for lack of a better word, temporary measures, to deal with construction site life. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, in addition to these measures, in addition to the permanent improvements, what construction site runoff measures will be taken in the building process?
Well, it's what was designed and permitted during.
I'm sorry, could you please?
It's what was designed and permitted during the state and town process. That stormwater management system would be proposed as part of the building permit application process. That would not change. It's one and the same.
And then you would have to add during construction, silt fence, hay bales, things of that nature to keep silt and runoff from getting into those areas.
That's correct. So within that approved plan set are plans that deal with these particular items as Dave has described: soil, sediment erosion control measures. As I mentioned in earlier testimony, there are supporting documents that go with this plan set that are part of the stormwater operation and maintenance, and they will be fully implemented.
And I know that we're recently, I think it was the planning board, and where some measures weren't taken out of the property, and that was required to be recently to be cleaned out so that stormwater would be taken care of appropriately. You're familiar with that?
Yes, I am.
And so, and that gets back to making sure that there is the appropriate stormwater maintenance plan and those inspections taking place.
Yes, that's correct.
And making sure that these structures are built appropriately so that they can actually handle that.
That's right. It's the timing of construction. It's the oversight. It's the annual maintenance, routine maintenance, and dealing with the system on a regular basis to ensure its highest and best performance.
Any other questions for the engineer?
I
One
have
other
a-
thing, just so in summary, all the stormwater management for the entire project is going to be done with Building 1. Is that correct?
It should be.
For the whole thing?
Yeah, I don't see why there's any reason why it wouldn't be. I mean,
And that could be made a condition if you had any concerns that
That's essentially what your question was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to explain that a little further, so the system, it's a perimeter system, it's all linked together, it's a sequence of practices. So if you don't build one component of that system, you don't have a system.
It's
So
incomplete.
it has to be built in its entirety.
And that entire system too was permitting at DEM. It wasn't just the components. You need the entire.
All right, it's all linked together. You can't segment it.
Mr. Costa, who takes care of the DEM permit? That would be covered by them, right?
DEM covers, the state of Rhode Island covers that
Right.
on top, but they got 3 eyes on watching them at all times.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the engineer?
I have a question about parking. It appears that the bulk of the parking is in the front of the building, and the commercial design standards say that the bulk should be on the side and in the back. Is that because of the watershed issue?
That and other site constraints. So the parking is primarily at the front of the building, the access points to the building. So the front building, there is parking on the north side and the east side, the Equipment Avenue side. The rear building, the parking is on the north side, I believe in close proximity to the access doors to the contractor space. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yes, thank you.
There's sort of you're correct, a limited amount of parking that you can locate in that front yard, so it complies with that requirement. Those are for the office users that will be utilizing that front door.
So,
Okay, thank you.
To that point then, how did you calculate the parking requirements? What uses are you suggesting that there are going to be there?
So the front building was utilized using the office parking count, which I believe is 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet.
Okay.
The balance was utilized as special trade contractor. So what, I don't recall the amount offhand. I know it's on the plans, but it was utilized. So those spaces would be designated for that particular use. If,
Okay.
for instance, 10 years down the line, Sean no longer owned this property, no longer had A1 roofing, sold this off, and say somebody wanted to come in and convert this to a retail use, let's say. You would then have to look at what's required for retail parking, which are much higher standards. So you wouldn't be able to utilize that building for that without providing for more parking, without coming back for a special use permit for a change of use. So this board would retain oversight and jurisdiction for any change of use for these facilities because of the watershed protection district, but also any change that would require increased parking.
Mr. Chairman, question for the engineer. Mike, so the stormwater mitigation system is obviously permitted by DEM, and they will oversee it as it gets, they'll inspect it as it gets put in, correct? Is this what I'm hearing?
They'll come out. They will come out and do a random inspection. So this is really up to. The primary folks involved in that process would be the town and the applicants.
You got my next question then.
assigns, which is
Once it's in, and once the building's up, Chris, who who checks to see that the system is being maintained and is the town required to inspect it, and how often?
We're not required. There are maintenance agreements that get recorded on certain projects when you do have these large detention ponds for filter cleanings and general maintenance, which is a gray area on, it's up to the owner to provide that service.
But who ensures it happens?
Their agreements, you make it a condition that they get done. If they don't, then there must be a bond, which there's the gray area written in the rules on, the town can do it and have a
This is a
third party
problem
go
with,
in and
this is
clean
a
them.
problem with the stormwater regulations that we find, and we put regulations on business owners, and when they construct buildings, and we tell them they have to do this, and then there's no follow-up.
It's 30,
you know.
40 years old, yes.
All right, I'm just bringing a point out.
Yeah.
That we can talk about this a lot, and it's a big concern here in the community, not with just this project, but the fact of the matter is that we ask for these things, DEM asks for these things, and then 10 years down the road, if it fails, whose problem is it? And there's no follow-up to this stuff.
That's where the ordinance needs new rules on. The third party doing it with a bond, or it goes access to the property.
I mean, if we're gonna make them do
We can't
something.
make that rules up without the rules in.
No, but I mean, if we're
place.
gonna put a condition, or the town puts conditions, or DEM puts conditions, there needs to be a follow-up somewhere along the line. You can make these people spend all the money in the world to do this stuff, and at the end of the day, when it's done, who makes sure that if they're compliant 10 years down the road?
That's a Monday night question.
Question that maybe needs to be asked somewhere along
If
the
I
line.
could just interject, so there were certainly a number of projects that were approved through the years, and there were probably mistakes relative to who owned the detention basin, and, you know, how things could be enforced.
You know where I'm going.
Yeah. Here, you know, the owner of this property owns the detention basin, right? So the responsibility is clear. Additionally, the town, within the last, I believe, 10 years, adopted revisions to its ordinances relative to stormwater management. And in those, they do require annual reporting by the owner to be certified by an engineer. And, you know, certainly that could all be made a condition, but there's supposed to be that type of follow-through with respect to this. The owner is supposed to retain an engineer. And this, you know, it's not rocket science relative to this. I mean, there can be an agreement recorded, for instance, with respect to septic systems. There are agreements that are recorded in the land evidence records that where an owner is required to have a third party on, you know, in that agreement saying they're going to do this work.
In this case, though, we don't need to speculate because it's in the planning board's recommendation that you cannot have this project approved unless you agree to the stipulation for not only having the system, but annual inspections and maintenance. It's right in their recommendation.
That's correct. And so the legal documents are also supposed to be recorded. So that there's going to be an easement and a declaration and the stormwater management plan detailing all of that recorded in the land evidence records. So it's going to be on this property. Yeah, it's.
My point, Tom, was, I get that.
Yeah.
Who enforces it?
Well,
That's the question.
and what we're saying, Rick, is that to the extent that we can make something happen, we're
Right.
doing it right here.
I
right
get
now.
it.
So, Mr. Martin, it's your testimony that your applicant will, as a condition, we're going to place it, the planning board recommendations in their entirety will be met,
Oh, absolutely.
along
Yes.
with the REDAM.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
Any other questions for the engineer?
Just one other question with regard to back to parking. The back unit, the back building we're saying is 3 units. And you calculated your parking based on that being 3 units, not 5.
Michael,
There's
you-
5
you
front
calc-
doors, there's 5 garage doors.
But there's only 3
You're asking what was the calculation for the tradesman space?
Yes.
Okay, so, for building 2, the requirement was, for the use, for the identified use was 1 space per 2 employees of the largest shift, plus 1 space for each motor vehicle maintained or used on the premises. So a minimum of 4 required.
4 in total.
Yes.
For the whole building?
For building 2,
For the 5,200 square foot building?
based on that calculation. So that was vetted with, the building department and stuff.
Can you review then with me again, so the parking requirement is for 1 building or for 3 units or for 5 units?
So we broke it down for each building. So I think you're.
I'm just concerned right now with the back building, the 5,200 square foot, and it looks like you're calling it 3 units. You've got it divided up 3 ways, right? If I'm looking at the right building, the top right-hand corner over there?
Right, so we're, on this plan, we're calling it building 2. So for the purposes of that calculation, the use that's identified, the unit calculation was 1 space for every 2 employees of the largest shift, plus 1 space for each motor vehicle maintained or used on the premises. So a minimum of 4 spaces, 4 required, 4 provided.
What are you talking about, ship? What does that mean?
Shift,
Shift?
S-I.
Oh, okay, all right. I thought you said ship, I'm sorry, like the
Shift.
largest component of it, okay.
And, you know, that is the parking requirement for the town, because they, you know, with respect to special trade contracted use, typically, you know, folks may show up in the morning and then leave. You know, the employees aren't there all day. You know, they're off-site at construction sites.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. Martland, do you have anyone else you'd like to bring?
I do have Mr. Hool.
Okay. Mr. Hool, raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony this evening will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
James Hool, 198 Union Street, Portsmouth, Rhode Island.
Mr. Hool, you've appeared before this board on numerous occasions in the capacity as a real estate expert, so we're going to recognize you tonight as an expert witness in that field.
Thank you.
Mr. Hool, you're familiar with the petition before the board this evening?
I am.
And you're familiar with the property?
I am.
Familiar with the plans of the property?
I am.
You're also familiar with the terms and provisions of the built-out zoning ordinance and comprehensive community plan?
Yes.
Now, the applicant is seeking a special use permit from this board this evening by virtue of the property being located in the watershed protection district.
That's correct.
And what did you do to prepare yourself this evening to testify?
Well, of course, I reviewed the petition, I reviewed the engineering plans, because that was clearly essential to this whole project, what the watershed, since the whole special use permit is predicated on satisfying the requirements associated with building in the watershed. So I looked at the engineering plans, I looked at the plans, visited the site, prepared, looked through the zoning code, and essentially looked at the criteria for the special use permit relative to the petition. Okay. So,
And what observations did you have?
well, I mean, I really looked at it in terms of the
again, in terms of the special use permit, I went through the 5 criteria that show up in the zoning code for special use permit 902, and I looked at it, whether it would result in significant diminution of property values. I don't see that at all. The surrounding area is all similar types of commercial property. I think it would blend in very well. You have, you don't come anywhere near the height on one building. The other building is well below the height. The uses are by right. They're homogeneous with the area, and I just didn't see anything that would impact the neighborhood negatively.
And there's a significant vegetated buffer and setback from many of the residential uses to the west.
To the west of the property, that's correct. I looked at it in terms of whether it would be a nuisance. I didn't see that at all. I didn't see anything that would be noisy in any of this use or produce a lot of lights or anything along that line. So I just felt that it would not be an impact to the neighborhood.
And are you previously aware that this site had been used for processing materials at one point?
Yes, yes.
And that had raised a significant consternation in the neighborhood because of the dust and the noise?
Yes, I was aware that, yeah, it was a problem site in the past.
It was a what site?
Problem site in the past for the neighborhood. I don't see any of that type of thing that would be occurring with this use, so I just didn't see it as having any kind of a nuisance for the neighborhood. Whether it was compatible with the comprehensive community plan, the planning board has already weighed in on this in favor of it, but I think that it's really important. I looked at the protection of the community character, and one of the things is that they recommend that any new commercial growth should continue to be infill development, which is exactly what this is. It's, again, very homogeneous to the area. They're trying to prevent sprawl into other areas and keep it within the business areas that exist in the town. And I just thought that it was very much in keeping, obviously, with that, since it is an infill development. The whole concept of having new business buildings built in town certainly is also in harmony with the aims of the comprehensive community plan. Then look to see whether it would be detrimental or substantially or permanently injure the appropriate use of property in the area. I think that is really handled with the nuisance. It wouldn't hurt any other uses in the area. They're very compatible uses. This is an LB zone. It's, again, a by right use in an LB zone. There are very similar uses everywhere in the neighborhood. So I didn't see that as a problem. And that the granting of the special use would not result in any conditions that are inimical to the public health, safety, or welfare. Again, I didn't see anything at all. It's just a very homogeneous use. So I think overall that it satisfies the 5 requirements, certainly from a real estate aspect and a land use aspect.
So, just to summarize quickly, you believe that this use meets all the criteria laid out in the zoning ordinance for the special use permit?
I do.
I don't have any further questions for this.
Any questions for Mr. Wolf from the board? I think we're good, Mr. Martland.
Thank you. I don't have any further witnesses, but my witness is available to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, well, let's open up to the public. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to either speak for or against the petition? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Can I have before we move on, I'd like to read the petition again into the record. The agenda was not exactly as the petition in the,
Petitioner requests that a special use permit be granted as follows. For permission to construct an office and special trade contractor building, footprint area of 10,800 square feet, a special trade contractor building with a footprint area of 5,200 square feet, associated parking and water quality improvements as approved by RIDM located in Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District pursuant to plans filed with said petition.
thank you, Mr. Heaney. If I could have a motion to accept the petition as presented?
I'll make a motion to accept the petition as presented.
Pursuant, maybe amend that to include the planning board and the,
Yeah, to include, there was actually 5 different organizations that provided recommendations. The planning board, the technical review committee, the conservation commission, the town engineer, RIDM, and DOT.
do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second made by Mr. Silvera. Discussion?
As far as the site is concerned and its use over, at least as far back as I can remember growing up here as a kid, it's always been some sort of commercial construction site. Whether it was making cement, whether it was selling materials for nurseries and gardening, et cetera. So it's always had a lot of activity on that site, and there's always been some sort of commercial construction coming out of that site. And as was already stated right up front, that was without any recognition of or any corrections to the erosion and wastewater runoff going off this property. So what I see here is a vast improvement to what we have currently, and therefore, in accordance with the parameters for special use, I believe that this is an improvement, so it will not cause a diminution of property value in the neighborhood, and certainly from a noise perspective, what currently goes on there and what is planned to go on there, it will not create a nuisance as we compare what's currently occurring. So I'm going to support this.
Other discussion?
Well, he summed it up very well. I'm gonna approve it on the same reasons that my colleague had.
I too am going to support the petition. The one thing that I will point out is I appreciate the time that was spent with the planning board on the design standard, because that's unusual for these industrial spaces. So we appreciate that the applicant took the time to meet with the planning board and not ask for a ton of waivers. So I too am going to support it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. With that, I'm going to take about a 7-minute break, and then we'll continue the hearing. The hearings. The next case we're going to hear, we're going to have to jump around a little bit only because of resources. So we're going to hear the following three cases, which I don't think will reach all three, but I want to give everyone a heads up, because if you're waiting for anything else, I don't think we're going to reach you. The next case we're going to hear is going to be Acacia Newport LLC, followed by On the Pond, and then the last case of the evening will be the Amarants on Aquidneck. And I think that will take us, if we can get through that, that'll take us to 9 o'clock when our hard stop is. So anyone that's waiting beyond that, I think can go home. Does that make sense, Mr. Costa? Mr. Monte?
You have it, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, and the solicitor's office is recused on the Acacia matter, so Melissa DeSalt will be stepping in.
Okay. Go ahead and read the petition, Mr. Heaney.
Petition of Acacia Newport LLC owners and Aaron Hawks applicant by their attorney Jeremiah C. Lynch III Esquire for a special use permit from sections 1106 to permit the construction of an addition to a single-family dwelling within the Watershed Protection District Zone 1. Said real estate is located at 32 Acacia Drive and further identified as Lot 178 on Tax Assessor's Plat 109 Northeast. And there is also a variance. Petition of Acacia Newport LLC owners and Aaron Hawks, applicant, and their attorney Jeremiah C. Lynch III Esquire for a variance from section 603, 701, 803G, and 903 to permit the construction of a front addition and a rear deck to a non-conforming structure. Said front addition will be 9.6 feet from the west side yard line where 20 feet is required, and said real estate is located at 32 Acacia Drive and further identified as Lot 178 on Tax Assessor's Plat 109 Northeast.
Good evening, Mr. Lynch.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you very much. I'll try to be brief. This matter may be familiar to you because back on January 28 of 2020, we were in front of you for the same site for a special use permit for the development in a Zone 1 watershed protection district. At that point, the applicant's plan was to demolish the existing structure, construct a new single-family dwelling that met the zoning setbacks, and made some changes for the stormwater management control. The only change is that now the applicant is going to renovate the existing structure rather than demolish the existing structure. The stormwater management issues and the Zone 1 issues are identical to what was approved by this board. The site is currently a 2-unit condominium in the site. It's served by an on-site septic system. What's being proposed is that the new dwelling, which will be converted to a single-family dwelling, will be tied in to a force main sewer line on South Acacia.
On the south location?
South Acacia.
Oh, okay, Acacia.
That is identical to what was proposed before. Same for the drainage plans. Ms. Small had submitted a drainage plan to you back in 2020 with a rain garden. That is going to be identical to what was proposed and approved by this board back in 2020. The existing septic that's servicing the site will be abandoned. And that deals with the Zone 1 issues. We have Ms. Small here. If you have any questions of her, she can answer those.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. It seems like that's the big issue tonight is the Zone 1. Good evening, Ms. Small.
Good evening.
Could you raise your right hand again?
On what?
Is she still sworn in? You're still sworn in.
Short, though, so
State your name and address for the record.
Lynn Small, Northeast Engineers, 6 Valley Road, Middletown.
Small, can you just explain the design
Sure. So the project has been modified or reduced scope to renovation and a couple additions to the building. Under existing condition, it is within 200 feet of the, what is that? Green End Pond, right there. So it's subject to a special use permit. Under current conditions, they have a septic system for the site and no stormwater provisions. Under the proposed conditions, we'll be providing a sewer pump station that will pump the wastewater up to Bliss Mine, and will include a rain garden for water quality treatment. When you previously reviewed this project and ultimately approved it, you had asked that we pull that rain garden as far inland as we could, and we did keep that on this plan that we resubmitted. So that, you'll see that rain garden's right at the bottom of the slope, as far away from the water course as possible.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not this proposed design can improve water quality?
I do. I believe there'll be an improvement to existing conditions, both because we're providing water quality provisions where none exist now, and we're getting rid of the septic system. That's also, I don't know if it's exactly within 200 feet. I think a portion of it ends up in the 200-foot radius, but not the entire system. But it is aged out, so it's not a pre-treated system. It's more of a conventional stone trench system. So the pump station will result in an improvement in that condition.
Any questions for Ms. Small? The deck, the new entrance, has there been any discussions with the neighbors, because it's going to?
The applicant owns the property to the west.
Oh, okay, so that was my question.
There's been no reaction at all from any conditions on the existing structure. So that's going to be the garage, it's going to be added on the northwest corner of the building.
Mhm.
And that will encroach along the mudroom, that's going to encroach the side yard setback. As I mentioned, the applicant does own the adjoining property.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Litch or Ms. Small? Let's open it up to the public. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak either for or against the petition at 32 Acacia Drive? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Could I have a motion first on the special use permit?
I'll make the motion to grant the special use permit.
I'll second.
Second by Eric Curtin. A special use permit is required because it's Zone 1 watershed protection area. I think the applicant, by tying into city sewer, goes above and beyond the criteria for building in a Zone 1 water protection area. Any other discussion?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Second order of business is the variance. Can I have a motion to accept?
I'll make the motion to grant the variance.
I'll second.
Discussion?
I'm going to vote in favor of it. I believe the relief is reasonably necessary and it's reasonable.
Any other discussion?
No.
I too am going to support the petition. I think it's the least relief necessary for the full enjoyment of the property. Taking a motion?
What's that?
He made the
You
motion.
made a
I made the
motion.
motion.
Oh, yeah, Tom. Who seconded it, Tom?
Eric.
Thank you. I'm getting
That's all.
tipsy. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Lynch. Ponds next.
Petition of On the Pond LLC owners and Diego's Middletown LLC applicant by their attorney, David P. Martland Esquire, for a special use permit from section 602, 803A, and 1103B to permit the expansion of an existing restaurant with a liquor license located in Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District by reconstructing and expanding a 324 square foot covered second floor deck and adding a 150 square foot third floor deck to the rear of the structure while reducing the overall capacity. Said real estate is located at 116 Aquinic Avenue and further identified as Lot 135 and Lot 136 on Tax Assessor's Plat 115 Southeast. And there's also a variance. Petition of On the Pond LLC owners and Diego's Middletown LLC applicant by their attorney, David P. Martland Esquire, for a variance from sections 603, 701, and 803G to allow the reconstruction of a second floor covered deck with a right side yard setback of 12 feet 9 inches where 20 feet is required, and a 48 feet 8 inch rear yard setback where 50 feet is required. Said real estate is located at 116 Aquinic Avenue and further identified as Lot 135 and 136 on Tax Assessor's Plat 115 Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, David Martland, representing On the Pond LLC and Diego's Middletown LLC. As you've indicated, there are two matters in front of the board, the special use permit as well as the petition for variance. This is the property located at 116 Aquidneck Avenue, Tax Assessor's Plat 115 Southeast, lots 135 and 136. Presently, there is the Diego's Restaurant that's located at this property. The property's been utilized as a restaurant for as long as I can remember. It was a restaurant or previously a pub, a bar for many years. The applicant is seeking to rebuild the deck that is on the back of the building. It is in terrible state of repair, needs to be repaired and replaced. In connection with that, the applicant isn't looking to expand the area of that deck, but the roof, he's proposing to construct a roof that will cover the deck. And on a portion of that roof, the roof extends beyond the footprint of the existing deck by 6 inches toward the pond and 6 inches toward to the north to his abutting property that he owns. Those encroachments of the roof are what have necessitated the variance request. So currently, there are already encroachments into the rear and side yard setbacks where the deck's located. The roof would encroach an additional 6 inches in both of those locations. The special use permit, we're here because the use itself is a restaurant with a liquor license that is allowed by special use permit, and because of Zone 1 of the Watershed Protection District. The special use permit associated with the restaurant is because of the addition of 150 square foot deck for the, what's referenced here is a third floor, which is really the second floor of the front of the structure. The deck is to, really to be a viewing deck up there. The applicant is also looking to sort of reconfigure the interior space in that third floor, which results in an overall reduction of capacity from 195 to what would be here, 154 overall capacity. Approximately 10 years ago, roughly, there was a petition that was granted with respect to this property and a prior owner that allowed for a capacity of 195 with a parking variance. So we're going to be, this is going to reduce that overall capacity by 41 to 154. So given that, I think you've got potentially less use because you're going to have less capacity. You've got an existing restaurant in the area. This has been a restaurant. I don't think there's any significant change with respect to that use, so that the board can see whether or not that this is the existing operation has created a nuisance in the neighborhood or led to a diminution of property values. It's been a restaurant and a pub for at least 40 years, likely more. And the watershed protection district, because there's some construction taking place in the watershed protection district, it's rebuilding the existing deck. It's not creating any more impervious surface. All of the site runoff will continue to be the same. So with me, that's a sort of an overall project. With me tonight, I've got Spencer McComb, who's the architect, Mike Russell, who's the site engineer, and I got Scott Kermel from Diego's to make a quick presentation. I know you've got another matter, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. One note, I do know Mr. Galvin is here on behalf of the city of Newport. The city has filed an objection in connection with this application, and we've got ongoing litigation with the city relative to use of what is essentially city property located to the west. There are parking spaces for this property that are located on the city of Newport property. Based on my research, those spaces have been in existence for at least 20 years. The city has asked and demanded that we remove those spaces. We've filed an action in Superior Court seeking adverse possession over that. The court has dismissed our complaint, and we've taken an appeal on that to the Supreme Court. So that's where things stand. The application I have filed, I've referenced, we've got 18 on-spot spaces. That is going to remain the same. That doesn't count any of the spaces located off-site on the city property. I don't think we can, those are not part of this application. I don't think we can take credit for those. We've got an existing situation with 18 on-spot spaces. With that, I would like to call Scott. Come up.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony this evening will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Scott Kermel, 213 Seaside Drive, Jamestown.
Okay, thank you.
Can you spell your last name?
Kirmil.
Thank you.
Scott, you're the principal with Alpine LLC and Diego's Real Plan LLC, is that correct?
Yes.
And you purchased this property in 2018, right?
Yes.
Were you involved in any of the improvements that are located on this property at the time of the purchase?
No.
You never filed any petitions previously prior required, you're purchasing this property for the deck, it's various structure.
No.
And when you purchase the property, sorry, the deck, located in the rear of the structure is in difficult conditions, is that right?
Yeah, not only is the design difficult, it's three-tiered. They basically designed it around a defunct walk-in cooler that's stuck down below it. So it's not only not accessible, but rotting and not framed at all to codes of any sort.
You've handed me some photographs from data, is that correct?
Yeah, I took some today just in case anyone hadn't taken a close look. I'm sorry, I only made 6 copies, but it might help for reference.
I've got 5 copies I can provide.
Let's put one in the record as Exhibit 1.
Let's share. We can share.
Thank you.
Dave, we can share. Yeah, I don't have any more hands here.
Okay.
Do the flipping anymore. I'm kind of busy.
So if you could kind of explain what I refer to as Exhibit 1, Page 1.
So basically, when we bought the building, we focused on renovating the inside. There's a new roof and a lot of new utilities. But the back, we've been waiting. It's the only thing that makes sense is to do it as a whole with replacing the deck, which is really in the worst condition. But also in the pictures, there's a couple defunct air conditioners that were somehow installed from the outside, 50 feet up, that are stuck. Those aren't in use. There's a bunch of rotten windows. That whole bumped out spot would be made flat, and the whole back would be shingled. So all that rotten woodwork would be done. We've done, we did like makeup on a pig sort of stuff while we tried to get this. Sorry.
I can't hear you. I just.
We cleaned it up and patched it up, but obviously this year we kind of stopped, so that's why it looks how it is. But we've been trying to just get this process going so we can kind of clean off the whole back of the building, demo the, if you go to page 2, there's like a white walk-in cooler and an exterior walk-in cooler underneath the deck that are built and framed around. So those all need to go in a dumpster too, and the whole thing leveled off to one level, so it's a little safer as far as guests walking on it. And the whole back of the building cleaned up and brought up to the new standards. The upper part is kind of made out, I think it looks like plywood and trim, so that would all go to new shingles as well. And our idea is also up above. That room has really been made to be, the primary source is a small function room. A lot of rehearsal dinners, a lot of bridal showers and that sort of thing. And everyone lines up to take their pictures in front of the windows, but asks if they can go down and get the sunset. And that's really the selling point for our space. So the viewing deck is the idea that when you have a private group up there, they can go out there and take their wedding photos and all that stuff. And also, obviously, the face of our business changed in the last 2 years. So having
What space has changed? I can't
the
hear you.
face of our business has changed in the last 2 years. So having a covered outdoor space is really crucial due to the pandemic. There's definitely a lot of guests who still aren't comfortable eating inside. So that would at least allow us for like some 3-season outdoor dining that doesn't require the guests running away if it rains. Our location really isn't very suitable to umbrellas, so we try our best and have a few for sun, but in general, we're looking for shade and rain relief.
And you're not looking to expand the service area of the deck over there. This would simply be built on the same footprint, right?
Yeah, keeping it with the same footprint, but going down to one level instead of 3 tiers.
Have you had any complaints from any neighbors relative to your operations?
No, we've had all positive feedback. I think haven't had any parking complaints from residential neighbors at all. We've utilized, you know, like parking attendants and stuff like that to make our business work, and that's kind of, we always looked at that as our issue. We've had great relations with our neighbors and a bunch of kind of expanding partnerships with other local businesses, so far so good.
I don't have any further questions for Mr. Colonel.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
I guess I had one question for the applicant. So I understand that second floor deck is deteriorated and needs to come down. And as I understand it, the footprint of that existing deck does not meet the setback requirement. Is it possible that when the new deck is built, it could be built in a way that does comply with the setback requirement, or would that be wholly impractical?
I'll probably put that to our architect, but we are only, the side setback really, it's just an alleyway, so it doesn't affect the neighboring business at all. I can't see that it would if it changed hands from us.
2 feet.
What was it, 2 feet off the rear? 2 feet. Yes, we've shrunk the plan a couple times in order to have any sort of seating. I think that's basically where it landed. I could let Spencer speak to that a little bit more, because we have revised it to get it down to the minimum variance that we could.
Right, I was referring to that it would be 12.9 feet where 20 feet is required.
Isn't that an already established setback? That 12.9?
Yeah, if I could answer your question, that is correct. The deck is already, it's in line with the footprint of the building there. Mr. Kermo actually owns the abutting property, so it's the setback he shares there. And it's just being reconstructed in the existing footprint. So the only expansion that's necessitating the variance would be the addition of the roof. So the roof overhangs 6 inches in those locations. I think, you know, if there weren't the roof, you know,
No, I understand all that. I was just saying, if it's coming down anyway, is that a reset situation where you would then be expected to build it within the setback requirements?
Well, I think if that were the case, just because I've looked at this a lot, the area that you could build the same amount of deck space would be, you know, more located into the middle of this lot, but that could impact the amount of the parking you have. It would take up parking stalls. So we didn't want to impact any of the parking. We want to make sure we maintain as much parking as we have on site. And so that's sort of the trade-off here is to maintain that parking without losing any further spaces.
And the rear setback is about 18 inches, right? A little less.
Yes, that's correct.
So that's how far you're into the rear setback.
Right.
But that's existing. That's not changing. It's changing a little bit.
Changing, yeah, by about half a foot
6
for the
inches.
roof.
Half a what?
Half a foot for the roof. I'm sorry.
Any other questions for the applicant?
If I could call Spencer McComb?
Certainly. Raise your right hand, Spencer. Do you swear the testimony this evening will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and address for the record.
Spencer McComb, 42 West Main Road, Middletown.
Thank you.
Spell your last name?
MCCOMBE.
Spencer, could you explain the plans that you and your office have prepared relative to the matter from the board this evening?
Sure, we already covered the problem with the existing condition, the faulty construction, the deteriorating structure. And so this was an opportunity to add something to the rear of the building that looked more attractive. If you know, from a comprehensive plan or planning board standpoint, adding some pitched roofs and making the building look a little better in the back was part of what we did here, as well as 2.0. So, yeah, the existing condition is not that attractive, plus it has all these issues with ADA issues and all that. So this was a way to design it with some roof lines and some shingle walls to get a nice appearance out there and as useful as possible, again, staying within the footprint that's already existing and adding some covered area for guests on the lower level. I think the drawings kind of show what we're up to. It's a fairly small addition. And again, the part of the structure that extends beyond is even with the existing building, which is already in that setback, and there's an existing deck that's already there. Building it back, to your point, not in the setback in that area is quite a hardship. It's already a very small space. There's limited guests that can sit out there. It's a beautiful view of the pond, and I think it serves right that it's been there. It hasn't been, been an issue with any neighbors, and that it's a nice place to sit and enjoy the sunset.
And this configuration allows you to maintain the existing footprint.
It's exactly the same footprint as the old footprint, and so cars get fairly close to the edges of those piers, but any bigger would then start affecting parking, which is already at a high premium on the site.
Is there a plan for any storage under the deck? And what I'm getting at is that, you know, if you look in the pictures here, and this is purely an aesthetic thing, but this is kind of the existing condition of it with the, I don't even know what those are, but the freezers and all the debris that's back there, you know, that's going to be cleaned up? Okay.
Yeah, so for the record, all of that's being cleaned up. Those built-in freezers that Scott had mentioned, we're going to go into a dumpster. Part of the plan, this also had to go through the plan review with the planning board. Conservation. Part of the planning board regulations requires the bike rack now. And so under there is where the bike racks are going to be located. So that's what's programmed for underneath that space. Bring that into compliance with the commercial design requirements.
And this isn't, there's no requirement yet for any of the design review for the Aquidneck Ave kind of overlay?
Atlantic Beach overlay?
Yeah, excuse me, Atlantic Beach, yeah.
That would be at the planning board.
No, because these plans were filed back in, I don't know whether it was May or June. It was prior to any changes of in adoption of the Aquidneck Beach Overlay District. So
Yeah.
it would not be subject to those, but it was subject to all of the planning board regulations and commercial design standards. And we had to go through the development plan review process. So we appeared before the planning board and the conservation commission with respect to this. They took site visits of the property before hearing the matter. And the planning board, or the planning department was, wanted to make sure things like the bike racks were provided for. Yeah, that was a requirement that we were unaware of. It had been a recent change. It was a change that occurred right around the time of the filing. It was either May or June. And so that caught up with this application, and that was done.
Mr. Chair? So I want to compliment you. I drove by there and took a look to see just what you were dealing with. and, you know, familiar with the parking and the premium that it is in that whole area. And again, being familiar with the Atlantic Beach overlay, and I think you're gonna be in keeping with the whole idea of what kind of business that they want down there, they're gonna want down there, and design standards and the like, even though you're not required to follow that. But I certainly think that, knowing your business, you know, it's certainly better than what's back there now, from what I could see, and what I could see from your pictures. I just want to commend you for doing a good job, and good luck.
Any other questions for Mr. Martling? You have another witness?
Yeah, I have Mr. Russell to briefly sort of explain the site conditions and the impacts or lack of impacts associated with what's being proposed from a watershed protection district standpoint.
You're already sworn in, so just state your name and address again for the record.
Mike Russell, 680 Whitnick Avenue here in Middletown.
Mike, can you explain to the board basically what happens with runoff presently on the site?
Sure, so very much like the petition we just heard, in its existing condition, there's no infrastructure here on this site. So runoff will run off the roof of the existing building and the parking area from Whitnick Avenue down to the city's property, which abuts the pond.
And the deck itself is actually over impervious surface, correct?
Right, so that just displaces, the roof area displaces existing impervious area that would otherwise runoff would run in the same direction, same location.
So there are no changes to the stormwater runoff. It's going to continue in the same fashion as today, and there aren't any requirements to provide any other measures.
That's correct.
Any other what?
Any other measures.
Nor is there a real ability to. So, given the location and the elevation of the site, but it's, as I said, it's just displacing existing impervious area, and you might say that the runoff coming off the roof would be cleaner than that of the pavement below it that it's covering.
Any other questions for Mr. Russell?
Yes, we stated that we're gonna add a deck, a roof to the deck. That doesn't change the amount of runoff that's going onto the surface?
So the precipitation that hits that roof is the same as it hits that same footprint area below it. It's the same color, and it's slanted in the same direction, heading to the same point. So it doesn't, all I'm saying is, as the area below the roof area, namely on the ground, the runoff off the roof is presumably cleaner than that hits the ground in that same area. It's picking up pollutants and carrying those towards the pond.
But that's still happening, even with the change in adding the roof, it's still gonna hit the parking lot before it gets to the pond.
Well, I guess in a perfect world, if everything is clean, perpendicular to one another, I don't see that, but I don't know I don't know what the applicant's plans are in that space at ground level that might, alleviate that problem, divert that water from going under. But as I understand it, it's basically displacing the area below it, and the flow is not going to commingle or run next to the building. I think everything is pitched away from the building towards the city's property and the pond, and not towards the building.
So even with the addition of the new roof, your position is no change to what's currently happening right now, as far as runoff is concerned?
Yeah, I mean, if my answer would be different if that was lawn area or landscaped area, the answer would be, yeah, it would change.
Right. And because of the lack of pitch, you're saying that you couldn't put something in like underground piping that the spouts would go down into or something along those lines.
I think there's nowhere to put it, there's nowhere to send it. I mean, you're in a floodplain in the rear of the property. Groundwater is likely very, very high. Certainly, nothing subsurface in the way of piping and structures, there's nowhere to go.
Okay.
Just don't have enough elevation or profile to the site at that location to deal with it on your property.
Right.
On the applicant's property.
Understood.
Any other questions for Mr. Russell? Thank you, Mr. Martin. Do you have any?
I have no further questions for Mr. Russell.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to the public. Mr. Galvin, would you like to come up and speak on behalf of the Newport Water Department?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the board, Gerard Galvin for the city of Newport. It gives me no pleasure to come and object to a local business trying to improve itself. But I did want to add a little bit of background to what Mr. Martland provided in terms of the litigation. Several years ago, the city was issued notices of violation relating to what we refer to as the moat behind this business and the other businesses that are adjacent to the pond there. That led to reviewing of surveys showing that several of the Middletown businesses were encroaching on city of Newport property. In an effort to recapture and improve and comply with DEM regulations, we engaged in communications with all of those neighbors, and through dialogue and through time, we've resolved all of them but one, this one, with all of those abutters pulling back their use to the property. This applicant decided to sue the city, asserting it owned the property based on how long it has used it, and the Superior Court ruled in the city of Newport's favor, saying they're continuing to use city of Newport land. And while we have no objection to their use as a restaurant, we certainly continue to object to their use of our property. That determination will be made in the Supreme Court now, but we think it inappropriate for them to be applying to expand their operation, while at least the latest ruling from our court system is that they're continuing to use city of Newport property. So I think what we would be looking for tonight is a delay on an approval or an approval pending the Supreme Court determination. If it rules in our favor, we don't have a problem with this approval going through, but we wouldn't want it acted upon until they are not using city of Newport property. And this is in our capacity as a property owner in Middletown. Just like any other neighbor coming in, we don't think it would be likely that you would be granting expansion relief to an applicant if they were using an abutter's property. So that's our objection. If you have any questions about that litigation history, I'm happy to answer it, but I have to interpose this objection to the granting of this tonight based on that status.
Thank you, Mr. Galvin.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Question, Mr. Galvin. So how far back has the history? Do you know how long it's been? Has it been 40 years, 50 years? I know that's been there, that business, and there was a pub there many, many years ago, but when I was in high school.
I don't
It was
know-
ancient.
I don't know the exact date, and we concede, I think, that it's longer than the 10-year period. I think there's certainly evidence of that. But the law is such that you cannot adversely possess municipally owned property.
What's the, knowing the way they hear court cases, what's the likelihood of this being heard in a timely manner by the Rhode Island Supreme Court?
Well, we're waiting, the applicants, not Mr. Martland, but they have a different attorney in the Supreme Court, and he has filed, I think, 4 or 5 motions for an extension to file his brief, which happens. We understand the litigation process takes a long time. So it's hard for me to predict when we might have an answer to that question. We're still waiting. We are waiting for their brief to explain what the basis is for their appeal.
Mr. Galvin.
And
Oh, go ahead.
a couple of, just 2 more questions. How many parking spaces are we talking about?
Well, they're not
Or
clearly,
how much? I mean, potentially, how many parking spaces are we talking about, Scott?
You said 4 earlier.
Nine or 10?
9 or 10. They also have the smoker, down there occasionally. And I think the other point I want to make is that we have had to take action relative to the applicant's neighbors on Aquidneck Ave. And those neighbors have complied and they've pulled their use of the property back. And so we're in a tough position now because we have compelled them to move back.
Well, they did that voluntarily. They didn't have to do that. I mean, they could do the same thing he's doing. So I think you have to take each case on its own merit.
Of course.
Whatever happened with those other people should not have any concern to this board. I think you have, again, as this board looks at this, and I'm not an attorney, but by the same token, you take each one on its own merit. So I personally, I think we should take this on its own merit. Not talking about what happened on either side of him on Aquidneck Avenue. My question is, and I guess my main question here for the board is that should this go to, well, it's going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court rule in the city's favor, then how do you unring the bell if we grant this?
Well, I would look at it, I think that's part of my point is that there's a pending Supreme Court action, and to grant an expansion of the use while that's pending is why we're raising this objection. We just want them to, and when you look at the special use permit criteria of a nuisance or impacting the abutting properties, I mean, this has been an ongoing trespass now for, as you've said.
It's only a trespass if it's recognized by the abutter and notified. So it's only been a trespass since you've notified them, correct?
Well, I don't know that.
Right, because they were using it for years and nobody said anything to them. It wasn't marked. Was it marked no trespassing by the city?
I don't know what the answer to that question is.
So, I mean,
It's a good question.
my question is, Mr. Martland, if you lose the 10 space, are you out of compliance with the parking regulation?
What I can indicate to the board is, this property is already out of compliance with the parking. It was granted variance relief 10-plus years ago. It was granted relief to have 195 occupants. I know that my brother's indicated that this is an expansion. Now, the expansion that we're talking about is a 150-foot square foot deck, viewing deck. But the occupancy numbers are coming down significantly from 195 that was previously granted by the town to 154. So there's actual reduction, not an expansion. Now, it may very well be that the city is successful in the Supreme Court litigation. We understand that. But when my client purchased this property, he saw the parking lot. There were no notices, at least from the seller, it indicated. It was only shortly after my client purchased the property 2018, that the city then, I believe it was after we filed an application with this board, that the city then notified them, "Well, those spots are on city property and there's a trespass." Those spots have been there for at least 20 years. You know, they may have to come out. You know, that may very well be the situation, but that's not going to change what is here. There is no expansion taking place. There's an actual reduction. Trying to upgrade the rear of this facility from a safety perspective, because the existing deck is unsafe. It is in 3 levels, and provide a covered portion. What happens if that, you know, we lose at the Supreme Court and you can't park there? Well, that's going to be up to the city. My client didn't install the parking, so I guess the city would have to, you know, they may rip up the parking, they may put up a fence, prevent access there. You know, that's what I think would happen. And we would have the remainder of the 18 spaces on the site that I've referenced in the petition. We're not asking, as part of this petition, to use the city property. You know, that's a civil matter that's underway.
If you allow me to ask our counsel some questions. Mr. Monti, is it safe to assume this is a civil matter and that we can still judge the special use permit under the 5 criteria?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And would it be up to the abutter to provide testimony and witness to the 5 criteria of how it's going to affect it for us to make that decision?
Yes, I agree with that analysis.
Okay, thank you.
What mechanism will actually reduce the occupancy from 195 down to 141? And then, Chris, this question's for you. Like, is that something that you oversee?
Well, it's the reduction of what they got for existing parking, which is always a good thing. You know? They're reducing their capacity, so of course that reduces the need for parking, you know?
How did you do that, though?
By the time this is done, we might have a new ordinance with the overlay district and how to calculate parking.
I thought you meant this meeting.
I would just add as well, I think if the proposal encroached on the area that is at issue and has been determined by the Superior Court and will be determined by the Supreme Court, then it would of course be inappropriate to pass on this. But I think it's within the board's discretion because it does not actually go on to the property that's subject to the lawsuit.
Thank you, Mr. Monti. Mr. Galvin, question for you. I understand your complaint. However, we're going to judge this tonight on the 5 criteria of the special use permit. Do you have any expert testimony that you'd like to put up?
I do not, and I fully respect your decision on this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Galvin. Is there anyone else that would like to ask any questions on the board before I open it up to the public? Is there anyone here that would like to speak either for or against the petition? Seeing none at this time, I'm going to close the public hearing. Before I ask for a motion, one thing that was pointed out during break is for the alternates to really freely discuss this, once I have the motion, you're not really allowed to speak. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the motion until after we have our discussion freely as a board. Then I'll ask for the motion. That way all members will be able to have input. Discussion?
Yeah, I thank the chair for that point he just made. And I would say, with respect, Mr. Galvin, I think what the objection of the city is not relevant at all to the particular application, whether or not there is this improved deck or the existing deck. Who owns those parking spaces is simply not relevant. I think the filing of the objection is more like a monkey wrench thrown into the situation. I just don't personally see it as bearing on the application in front of us one way or the other.
Other discussion?
I just have one question. The deck that they have is not on the land that is...
It's not.
Okay, it's definitely on their land.
It's on their land,
Okay,
and the,
that's what I wanted to make sure. I wanted to make sure, because it had gone back and forth so many
and
times.
the rear setback remains the same, so there's no further encroachment towards their land.
Okay.
So, other discussion from the board? At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion for the, first for the variance. Can I have a motion for the variance?
Make a motion to approve the variance.
Motion made by Eric Curtin. Do I have a second?
I second.
Second by Judith Rosenthal. Discussion?
Well, I'm going to vote in favor of it. I believe that the dispute for the parking spaces is a totally different animal, and I think that I'm going to vote in favor of it.
Other discussion on the variance? The dimensional variance that they're requesting, the bulk of it is to the side, which is also owned by the petitioner, to the north, and it's owned by the petitioner. The rear setback is remaining the same at about a foot, 1.2 feet. So I too am going to support it. All those in favor of the variance?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Now we'll take up the special use. Can I have a motion to accept the special use?
I make a motion for the special use.
Judith makes the first. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Tom Silvera. Discussion?
Well, I believe it meets the criteria of the special use ordinance, so I'm going to vote for it.
Other discussion?
And as far as hazardous conditions are concerned, based on the discussion already given by the lawyers and experts, we know that they're improving a very hazardous condition that exists right now. And I think that's probably one point on this one that is especially important to approving this, and that's why I'm going to support it.
Yeah, I think it meets all 5 of the criteria. I don't think there'll be any hazardous condition. I know from experience that the applicant during times of busy traffic has valet parking, which I think is excellent. I think it's in compliance with the comprehensive community plan, and I think it's actually in compliance with the new Atlantic Beach District overlay district. So I too am going to support it. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Yeah, I'm going to put that in. We're labeling the pictures Exhibit 1.
I think I captured it.
Mr. Bean, we have 15 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I mean,
I can promise you opening position at our next meeting.
that's fine, Mr. Chair, I understand.
Yeah.
My case will probably take about 30 minutes to maybe 45 at the most.
Yeah, but I want to make sure we have time and we're not rushed.
That's fine.
So, thank you for your patience.
Thank you.
Could I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. The meeting is now adjourned, 9:45.